Looking to call a special meeting of council Monday, June 20th to order at 6:04. Just a bit of a change up because the purpose of the meeting tonight was actually more to deal with the comment and presentation with the provincial consultants. But we did manage to squeeze in another item in here. So I would, ahead of actually introducing that item to the floor, allow for the applicant to be able to address council in just an information. Okay? Yeah, that will be fine at that time, sure. All right, so looking with that, approval of the agenda for this evening?
Move approval.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. And that first item this evening is item 2.1 in regards to the building permit application for retaining wall at 446 Pelican Drive. And I'll have you come up and do your piece first, and then we'll have staff on that. Okay. And same thing applies, Chad or Jandy, name and address. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jandy Gruen at 446 Pelican. I don't ever speak out. I'm very shy normally, but I'm going to do my best here. Chad and I have lived and been chosen for the past 9 years with our daughter Asia. We have been looking for our perfect home for approximately the same amount of time. Over the years, we like to drive up Pelican and have a look at, because we really love the area. The idea of a newer home with manicured gardens that suited the needs of our family, our daughter Asia, who goes to Royal Bay School, and a safe spot for our beloved pets, Sydney, our golden retriever, and 2 rescue cats, Bill and Tuxie, was very important to us. At that time, Gary McGinnis had the lots listed. 446 was listed at $319K, which was not affordable, nor did it make financial sense. So we waited, at which time the lots had come off the market. We decided to contact Lehigh directly to see if they would consider selling the lot 446 privately. Early February, we were in negotiations with Sophie Mullen. She told us that she looked forward to our offer. We were really excited with the opportunity. However, we really wanted to do our due diligence first to make sure we were able to build what we wanted. Shortly after, approximately February the 10th, Chad went down to the city of Colwood. He met with Ron North and Dennis Carlson. Chad explained that we were in discussions about purchasing a lot from the developer at Royal Bay, The Bluffs. They spoke about building schemes, application process, timelines, costs, fees, and most importantly, retaining walls were discussed. There was no mention of a draft proposed bylaw that may affect our property, which from the notes from council, this was discussed end of January 2016. Ron says there is talk of something possibly coming out, but it shouldn't affect your application. They also failed to mention that there was an open house coming up February the 25th, 2016. We went away for a short visit to Whistler. When we came back February 21st, all the lots were back up for sale, including 446 Pelican, listed for $239K, a reasonable or a significant drop in price. We contacted Sophie Mullen. She told us to speak to Cheryl Barnes, the realtor. We put in our offer February 22nd. After 6 contracts later, due to the fact Lehigh had 2 lawyers working on their contracts, numerous back and forth changes to the contract, we finally had an accepted offer March 1st, even winning in a multiple offer situation. Our notary, James Farley, reviewed the documents with us and removed conditions March 9th. We sent our compliance deposit and we were ready to move on, getting the lot ready to build. Based on the pegs, we noticed there may be an encroachment, so we had the lot surveyed. In fact, there was a visible encroachment. Most of the neighbors' retaining wall is on our property, as you see in the photos that I had submitted prior. March 18th, Chad went back into the city of Colwood. He spoke again to Ron North and Dennis Carlson. They told him he could do site prep and grubbing so you can see your lot line and where the retaining wall will go. This lot in particular was not a shovel-ready lot. In fact, we spoke to a very established developer. He could not believe a developer would put a lot up for sale like that. It was overgrown with blackberries and broom, so it made it impossible to see the foundation for where the retaining wall would go without clearing it. I want to mention our lot will be very affected by this proposed bylaw change. We have seen neighbors from Pelican come out to speak. Our lot is on the back side, so we do not see the neighbors that have spoke out against us. I would ask you to please look at the pictures that we provide in our application, and this is where I'll turn it over to Chad to complete the presentation. Thank you.
Chad Pretzel, 446 Pelican. Just to confirm, has everyone on council had the opportunity to review our written submission that was sent in today? Yes? Okay. So it is quite self-explanatory, I do believe. But just to highlight on a few things, the original report that was submitted by the Deputy Director of Planning on June 8th highlighted a couple of key issues. One was the statutory right-of-way, which he did mention seemed to prohibit construction of a retaining wall on our lot. However, as you read in our written submission, the two statutory right-of-way bylaws appear to be virtually identical for sewer, drainage, water, and utilities. It's our understanding that the CRD is the one who is responsible for those services, which are on the front of the lot on the side of the road, and the second statutory right-of-way, which is for sewers, drainage, water, and utilities, is on the back side. And on June 17th, we had a chance to meet with the Deputy Director of Planning again, and he did mention that there was provisions within the current structure and framework whereby, as you read, we could build the retaining wall on the statutory right-of-way as long as we first sought written consent from the municipality. So this is the written consent that we are seeking. Number two, the proposed retaining wall bylaw for the retaining wall, speaking with the site administrator who's required to approve all building or designs for the subdivision. We met with him on June 18th, and I quote, he stated regarding our building permit application for the retaining wall, "I don't have a problem with your retaining wall as it is proposed. However, it should be aesthetically pleasing and not too industrial-like looking." So we provided him with some photos of lock blocks which are granite-faced or textured. They are significantly more expensive than the regular Allen blocks. We are prepared. We're prepared to spend that money on the retaining wall and not on litigation. The third point, duty of care, negligence, misrepresentation by municipal staff. You're well aware of the Hercules Management Limited versus Ernst & Young. It's been provided in the written submission. On no fewer than 3 occasions, it appears there's been significant shortcomings.
Mr. Pretzel, we're here to hear the request of your part, not the other part.
Okay.
Thank you.
So what we would like to do is one thing. We have been wronged. Council, you have the opportunity to make it right. The 30-day hold on the building permit application for a retaining wall at 446 Pelican will end June 25th, 2016, a Saturday. I urge you to vote against the recommendation as it's proposed in the report and opt for option C, which would allow our building permit to be issued June 27th, the first business day, as soon as possible after the 30-day hold, and that's building permit 16148. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just add?
Yes.
With the lock blocks too, we planned on putting greenery over the lock blocks so that it would just blend in with the park that's right beside us. So if you look at the photos, it would be blended in with greenery going over, because obviously it looks more natural if you've got a greener appeal to the front of it.
Thank you. With that, looking to staff to present report.
Thank you, Your Worship. Staff received a building permit application for a retaining wall located at 446 Pelican Drive. The plans show the retaining wall ranging in height from 0 meters to a height of 3.6 meters along the rear property line and from 3.6 meters to 5.5 meters along the southern side property line. As the proposed wall exceeds the 1.2 meter height maximum, a building permit is required. The retaining wall exceeds the maximum height permitted as per the land use bylaw amendment bylaw that is currently in progress. At the regular meeting on June 13th, 2016, Council resolved to withhold the building permit for a period of 30 days, starting from May 26th, the date of the application, and that further a report be considered during the 30-day period regarding withholding the building permit for a further period of time as per legislation allows. Colwood Land Use Bylaw 1989 Amendment number 153, retaining wall regulations, was given third reading on June 13th, 2016. In order to enable Council to complete consideration of the bylaw that is under preparation, staff recommend that the building permit application for retaining wall located at 446 Pelican Drive be withheld for a further period of 60 days, commencing on June 25th, 2016. Thank you.
Questions from council? Eden. Councillor Day.
I'd be prepared to move the staff recommendation.
Seconder? Further discussion? Question, staff? With putting in this 60 days, this will allow the applicants to continue to work with you on this
Madam Mayor, in regard to the retaining wall being in line with the proposed bylaw, is that?
With the property and everything that's on it, and I understand that there are some issues on there, so they can continue to work.
Right. This recommendation pertains only to the issuance of the building permit, so that would be the only thing that would be withheld. Interaction with staff as appropriate in terms of other issues of due diligence would be permitted to proceed.
Okay, good, thank you. Any other questions? All those in favor then? Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to item number 2.2, presentation we have in the audience this evening with the Integrated Services and Governance Initiative, Bob Faye and Dan Huang from Circle Square Solutions and Urban Systems. Dan.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. Appreciate having the opportunity to speak with you this evening, and or more importantly, listen to you this evening about the project. I am Bob DeFay. I'm from Circle Square Solutions, and as the Mayor said, this is Dan Huang from Urban Systems, and we talk a little bit about the work. The work itself is grounded in a shared understanding of the regions, between the regions, municipalities, and the provincial government, and that was reached in March of 2016. And it responds to citizen interest that was expressed in the 2014 referenda, a number of which took place, and also local government interests that were expressed in meetings with the Minister of Community, Sport and Cultural Development in terms of gathering facts around the current service delivery, increasing the understanding about service delivery best practices, and exploring further opportunities to better integrate service and governance. And Urban Systems and Circle Square Solutions have been engaged by the Ministry of community sport and cultural development after a competitive bidding process to help implement the initiative. So our job is to prepare a report including information about how services are currently delivered in the region, the challenges and the opportunities identified by area local governments, and we are meeting with all of them. Several meetings are taking place this evening. And identify the challenges that are associated with various approaches, because as you will all appreciate, integration is a broad spectrum. And so we will be asking you about that. And also to do a survey of service provision best practices from other local governments so we can learn. The process has 4 components. First of all, establishing the facts on how services are currently delivered in the region. This will involve work with local governments. We'll be collecting information on current services and governance arrangements as well for each of the local governments within the capital area. It will help to establish the facts and about who delivers the service, to whom, and how. And I should note, however, that the comparison of costs and service efficiency across and between local governments in the capital area is not within the scope of this activity. And on this particular information gathering, fact gathering exercise, it will be Urban Systems that takes the lead on that particular component. Changed the order. Okay, so the second part is the second task, the component that needs to be undertaken is the survey of best practices. As I said before, gathering information on what other jurisdictions and public bodies are doing to create efficiencies within organizations. And the other important thing that I want to emphasize at this point is that rather than us identifying potential solutions, the goal is in fact to provide a range of examples that may be of assistance to local governments. And we would be very interested in areas of interest, thoughts that you have about opportunities that you can share with us this evening. The third component of this is to identify the challenges and opportunities identified by area local governments. And this involves facilitated discussions within and among local governments like we're having this evening to help us identify the underlying issues, any barriers, any opportunities that you can identify towards service and governance integration. The goal for us is to summarize the themes, the key issues, the opportunities, and the common interests that are articulated by the participants, and circle square solutions with my colleagues, Dale Wall, who's former Deputy Minister for Local Government, and George Abbott, former Minister for Local Government, will be undertaking that work. There's a fourth part, which is engaging stakeholders, and within this component, we'll be providing an opportunity for some of the other stakeholders, non-local government service providers, representatives of the business and tourism sectors and community-based groups to also share their perceptions on the issues and opportunities facing local governments within the larger capital area. We will as well be engaging and discussing this issue with local area First Nations for the purposes of informing them about the initiative and also inquiring as to the opportunities for them to share information related to the initiative. We're going to be producing 2 outputs. An interim report will provide the basis for further discussions with you, and then a final report that will bring together the information gathered in each of those activities, 4 activity areas that I mentioned before. Spoken a little bit about the team, Urban Systems, Dan, James Klukas, Sean Heffernan, and as I mentioned, the other person that is involved in Circle Square Solutions is Chris Trumpy, and Chris is a longtime respected Deputy Minister of Finance. So in terms of the time frame, this is what we're doing right now in June and July, the first round of dialogue that we're undertaking. The interim report we are expecting by late September. Then there is a second round of dialogue. You will have that interim report, and we will come out again and we'll ask you about it and see if you have further thoughts and further information or further concerns or sense of opportunities that may present themselves. We're looking to have the final report completed in November. So as I said, we're here today to start that discussion, and I want to make it very clear that this is an exercise of us listening to you. So my remarks are going to wrap up very quickly. It's not about us talking to you, and we are very excited to be here this evening and to hear what you have to say, your thoughts about this. So there are some questions you've seen probably in your slide package. These are some of the questions that you may wish to touch upon, and I'll ask Dan to facilitate that while I take notes of what you're saying. But I would do what I did in the last session that I had with another council, which is to ask the mayor to give me a little bit of context and perspective from Colwood about what the issues are that you're facing, how integration might or might not help you with that, and also give me a sense of the future. I just drove through, and I often drive through, and I see a great deal of building going on, and that's obviously part of the future context, and I'd like some thoughts, sort of framing thoughts about how you see integration possibly or possibly not helping that. Thank you.
Good. Well, we have an interactive council here, so we should have lots of discussion. Hi, Dan.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. I won't say much more than Bob had said to introduce the project, except that we're very excited to be working with all of the communities in the region on this initiative. Bob outlined what this project is. I guess I'll just make mention of what this project is not. It is not the A word. It is not an amalgamation study. And secondly, it is not a detailed cost analysis. And so we are looking at services, but we just don't have the scope to look at, the detailed costs, community to community. So it really is a bit of a high-level study, but it is your document at the end of the day, and the ministry has asked us to provide you with whatever tools, with whatever research, with whatever issues that you'd like us to look at within the context of the scope of this project. So with that, I'll turn it over to the question that Bob had asked you, Mayor Hamilton, about where you see Colwood in the as far as services goes within this region, and where you see some of the opportunities and obviously some of the challenges facing Colwood. So we'll start with that.
So, it's not a hidden secret. It's in a state of growth as you traverse through many of the areas that are underway. So what that brings over the next little while, some of the problem of that is that those large developments are scheduled for, 15, 20-year plus kinds of development timelines. So trying to plan now and be ready for then is a bit of a challenge in what we're doing, and it's a bit of a slow process to get us to the ultimate end. So lots of work being done. We are challenged sometimes with recognition as, West Shore versus the downtown, that, there is an existing model with the regional district that is supposed to be that, holder of services in a lot of the areas, and yet it's not consistent, and it's not, I would go so far as to say, not fair and not equal. We have, there's many aspects, and I guess the question back to you folks is how is that being handled in the mix of this? Because we may be 13 municipalities, but there is, a body that serves various aspects from each of us, and how's that being managed in getting information as well?
question is about the CRD. So again, it is a service study. So we're going to be looking to each of the individual municipalities to tell us what services you're providing today, how they're provided, and what relationships, either do you provide them yourselves, do you contract those out, do you partner with other municipalities? And then the regional district, the CRD, is also part of this study as a facilitator of some services as well too. So they can be the broker or the facilitator of those services. They can also provide direct services as well too. So in essence, we are looking at kind of the 14 local governments in this region. We're not looking at electoral area services. We're just looking at the 13 municipalities and the services that you provide, either individually or jointly, either internally or externally, as well as the services that the Capital Regional District helps to facilitate and or provide on behalf of the municipalities, municipal partners, or directly for the municipal partners. And I guess that's as far as the scope of this study that's the scope of this study at this point. So does that answer your question? Or are you
Well, it just that, I think that there's a real need, that to start at a place where we're already working, and whether that is a required service review there, because there have been opportunities that I've seen where municipalities could perhaps engage and have a better outcome at a more reasonable cost to taxpayers, at a more productive and efficient way of doing the service. And yet you may have entered into the service at the regional district with a handshake, but you are not leaving without a very thorough going over, and an expensive one at that. So it's a bit of a threat. It's the heavy hanging, you'll do it this way or else kind of a thing. And I don't think that in itself brings out good, productive results. So, for me, having sat on that board for the last near 5 years, I think that there's a real need to have a committed review as to the efficiencies that are there, and are we doing it in the best way that may allow for a more a greater opportunity for that integration between my neighboring community, instead of it's an all or nothing kind of decision that we have to make.
So to be clear, Worship, there's not a service review study necessarily. It's a kind of a fact gathering. So we're going to be looking at all the municipalities, identify those services that each community is providing, both individually and jointly. Ideally, for the public, we'd like to produce a document that I don't think the general public knows exactly all the services that Colwood provides, or that your neighboring municipalities provide, or those services that you provide together. So hopefully it's establishing those facts, and then as a starting point.
And we do have, I'm not sure if this document was provided to these folks that is in our agenda packages.
Your Worship, we can share it with them after the meeting.
But that we do have, for benefit of council, in there. Staff did take a look at some of our existing. So, things like animal control, we use Capital Regional District as opposed to a private provider. Automatic aid agreements, there's a number of sewer connections, bus shelters, CREST, emergency facilities use, sanitary effluent, and we run through various Langford, View Royal, our partners, Highland and Chosen in some, Langford only, BC Transit, intermunicipal. There's like a number of those, I think 23 that were identified, plus we have a good neighbor protocol agreement in place, a number of other sort of general entities that are there. So 4 pages worth of what we're already doing. We'd be happy to share that with you rather than going through them one-on-one. But I think that, I'd be interested and in finding out if there's better ways within this, because we sometimes get a little bit limited to seeing, something that might be right before us. So I see Councillor Day's hand in air. Question, comment?
question, because I would really like to know if your focus of your study is going to be about what is best for perhaps a slim majority of the residents of the Capital Regional District, or if it is concerned with what is the best for every participant in the Capital Regional District, because that's where the rub is with our regional governance system. It works well when we are free to contract with the CRD, for example, Animal Control Services. That's a choice that we make to contract with them for that service. And if they should not be providing the services that we're looking for, we would, at the end of that contract, would be free to look to a different service provider. However, when we're locked into a service such as the hospital district, for example, and a new service is contemplated, we recently at the CRD board for the housing projects have decided to go through the hospital board for that. That is a $30,000 implication for Colwood this year. We were never asked. We have zero input, like not enough input. We have none. And if every member of the West Shore, Langford, Colwood, View Royal, Highlands, and Metchosin all disagreed with the point of view that is shared by Victoria, Saanich, and Oak Bay, we're done. There is so what we're seeing happen, I chair and I'm really all for working together where we can. I chair the Victoria Family Court and Youth Justice Committee, and I have done for over 8 years anyways as chair, been on the committee for longer. And, there's a lot that we can do together, but we need to do it in a way where we understand what the situation is in each sub-regional area. And Colwood has been seeing vast differences between our service levels and that of other parts of the Capital Regional District. For example, youth mental health. If you were waiting for services for youth mental health in Colwood, you'd be on the wait list for approximately a year before you would get service. If you were in James Bay and you were looking for youth mental health, you would wait 4 months. So, very big differences. And with, it sounds like a great idea that we'll all get together, we'll put money into the pot and we'll address issues, whether it's homelessness or youth homelessness or services. When those services are located centrally downtown, our kids cannot access them because you're looking at, in rush hour traffic, an hour and 15 minutes to get into town and the same to come back out again. So families with kids who need service can't reasonably be expected to do that on top of everything else they need to do. So I guess I'll leave it there, but I'm not at all opposed to working with other parts of the region, but we have to do it in a smart way where we have a choice and where we can choose a service that works for our residents so that we can adequately represent them.
Thank you. Through the chair, this is exactly the kind of dialogue we're hoping to achieve, and given tonight's timeline, this is certainly your meeting. After the meeting, we also have a survey that's to be made available for ideally all of the elected officials, the 91 elected officials within this region, and we'll provide that through your CAO, and then he can make that available. And so it will bring voice to those who may or may not get a chance to speak tonight, or who isn't here either. So we're hopefully our starting position of what's working, but we also want to know where are those challenge points and how are decisions being made, and are there opportunities to potentially change that? Some things within the current legislation, there might be tools to change that today. Some may not be able to be changed now may need some legislative adjustment, and so that's why the province has asked us to kind of provide this forum for conversation to see where some of those changes might have to be made. So I'll leave it at that, and it's your meeting, Your Worship.
Any other questions or comments from council? Councillor Logan?
Thank you, Worship. Thank you, Dan and Bob, for coming out tonight. And I think you're kind of getting a theme of some of the concerns that we have, and specifically regarding the services that the Capital Regional District provides. And while they provide some excellent services, such as water and parks, as an example, where there's some good local collaboration at the administrative level, that's the area that seems to cave in from a smaller local government point of view. So, I'm hoping through this process, at least the message is brought to the province that the role of the CRD in the governance structure is something that is seen as a stumbling block for particularly the smaller local governments that are looking for some relevance at that level. And Cynthia brought it up, and the mayor brought up there seems to be this us and them mentality between the core, and I'm sure that Peninsula feels it as we do on the West Shore about the lack of confidence, whether that's true or perceived, of receiving or having the ability to receive some services that we buy into. So it's and I know it's a large board. I chair CREST, which is an equally large board, 20 members, and it's one vote, one municipality, and it's a different feeling when we're going through the decision-making process there, because everyone's on an equal footing, and so there's some sensitivity to Victoria's feelings on a specific issue, as are Sydney, Central Saanich, Colwood, or Metchosin, and that's taken seriously, and it's factors into the decision-making process. So, just looking at your questions, I think, of course, the CRD is certainly a key issue for us, and I'm sure you'll hear about it from other municipalities. We'd love to see the spotlight specifically on that particular area. I think the CAO's report will identify a number of very key areas that we've been able to collaborate, because we're eager to collaborate at the local government level, because there's more sense of control and say, as opposed to collaborating on the regional level, no matter how valid it may or may not be, but it's just that trust factor. So,
through the chair, if I may, we've heard from a couple of other communities about water as one of the success stories, and parks as well too. So, I guess for our benefit, what is it that makes those services successful versus others? Is it just the structure? Is it the decision making? Is it the voting strength? Are there specific nuggets? Recreation, I would say, is probably another one that has come out as successful as well too. So can you put it in a nugget why those ones are a successful regional collaboration service?
Yeah, water is an example. There's the Juan de Fuca Retail Water Distribution Commission that looks after water services on the West Shore, and makes recommendations up to the Regional Water Supply Commission, which in itself has, I can't remember the terminology, but it has the authority to make decisions without having to necessarily go to the CRD board. So it's, again, there's some, I think structure at that level is different, but also it's a service that's seen as shared by all, and it's a different, it's hard to describe, but it's a bit of a different attitude, I think, at those regional boards, that regional board, the Water Commission, and they also take the recommendations from the Juan de Fuca Retail Water Commission seriously and approve as well. So I'm not sure how else to describe it, but
The water, they didn't build it, though. They took it over from Greater Victoria Water.
yeah.
Rob.
Thanks. So again, repeating, and you're going to hear this over and over and over. But basically, I guess to summarize it, what it means, the issue that we have as a Colwood Council is that concept of taxation without representation. So basically, we're in a situation where we're paying for something, but we don't necessarily get say over it, which becomes very difficult, especially when our community specifically doesn't agree with something. So what happens is we end up doing something that our community basically doesn't necessarily agree with. So I think when you're addressing this, I think one of the biggest issues you're going to have to address is the governance issue, and how does that get resolved? And I think that's going to be a huge step to making this successful or not successful, is defining what that governance structure is and how, so that everyone feels representative. So saying that, moving on, I would say one of the most fascinating issues that isn't integrated right now, which I wish it was, is our transportation master plans. That's one of our biggest concerns is we have these municipalities out there building transportation master plans, but they're doing what's in best interest of their municipality, not necessarily what's in the best interest of the municipalities that neighbor. And we're just as guilty of that. I mean, I don't think we necessarily think is this going to make what we decide, is it going to make Machosen to get those people home faster? We don't care, right? Like we care about our Colwood residents. And it's the same thing that we have residents living here in Colwood who are having a very difficult time getting into Victoria, and we've got no way of integrating that. So I think transportation would be a huge one. I also think that there's some synergies with IT that would definitely be beneficial, that we could see some significant cost savings if we integrated all our IT. And you mentioned recreation. Recreation's an interesting challenge because, for example, with West Shore Park and Rec, 15% of all our memberships are sold to people who do not contribute at all to West Shore Park and Rec, so they're outside of the municipality, but they're still utilizing our facilities. So, I mean, that may balance out because maybe there's people in Colwood who go use Oak Bay. So, but it's an interesting challenge. The other thing, I know for myself personally, my frustration has been that the municipality has contributed to things. So, for example, we've contributed to the CRD Parks Acquisition Fund, and we've contributed to the affordable housing strategy, and none of that has ever occurred in Colwood. So we continue to add money, but we never actually see the benefit in our specific municipality. So that's a struggle. And so that discourages you from wanting to be integrated because you're not seeing necessarily the benefit in your community. Now, that's being selfish because perhaps Colwood residents benefit from a park that's maybe in Langford or something, but to be honest, it would be nice to actually start seeing some of that stuff occur within our municipality, in our jurisdictions as well. That's all I got.
I just forgot to mention one of my things, and it's one of the opportunities that I think there is there's one forgotten level of government, and that is the school districts. And the school districts offer both locations, like the Community Learning Center at our new high school, but they also, some of the way that those administrations are set up has blocked our being able to do certain community activities there that their unions may feel is possibly infringing on some job that, you know, perhaps has not been included in their budget this year. You know, ours for example, have been cut for counseling services. So one of the things that we would have liked to see through the Family Court and Youth Justice Committee would be some youth counseling available after hours. But that location is pretty much not available to us because of the issue of the cutbacks for their counselors. So I think that's a difficulty where our kids are actually suffering. I mean, we will find a workaround, but it seems somehow wrong that that community space is not available because of that issue.
Just through the chair, the integration with provincial and federal agencies or school districts, we can speak to them a little bit, but it's a little bit out of scope with respect to or at least we're going to try to get the 13 communities in the regional district to think about those services that you can provide today and make those changes. But certainly we can speak to those as best we can. But we are looking to the services that you provide in your in your jurisdiction, I guess.
Well, I just would add that just remember we have to collect the taxes for them too.
Fair enough. Absolutely. Understood.
Anyone else? One of the points that Councillor Martin touched on was the taxation without representation, and I mean one of the biggest, stories, or things to point to if that's what you're, going to end up with in there is the wastewater sewage treatment, issue that's before us right at this point. Colwood has always been very proactive and pro-involved in trying to find a solution. But the finance formula that they have created at the CRD board there would put us, with taxing our population in order to keep costs reasonable as we build into the future so that we can start dropping those costs. But no matter what's said, we sit with a 30% population that has sewers, 70% existing that don't, and we're relying on the new growth coming in to start changing those numbers. But at the present time, everybody gets charged for it. So in fact, there's probably folks who may not see a pipe to pump into for 30 or 40 years, and yet they're paying the same thing as in 2 doors over or 2 streets over might be paying. So we haven't even seen that one kind of get publicized or get out there yet, because we don't have an actual plant running and we don't have actual costs being billed out, but it's coming. And again, I can only expect that there'll be significant inquiry from the public when they realize that they're not the same as everybody else. And I mean, if you're paying the same as Oak Bay that has full service with leaky pipes, that are being repaired along the way, it really then demonstrates the inequity of how it gets worked out.
Thank you for that. We're a bit cautious to use the phrase taxation without representation because you technically do have representation. There's certainly the challenges that we're hearing is about the weighted vote and how that works, and it's the percentage of representation. So very interested to hear about Councillor Logan's comment about Crest and how that's a different one vote, one municipality model. So for that particular service, so I'd be interested to kind of unpack at a future date how that came about and how that, as you said, it feels different. Decision making feels different. So we're just a little cautious about that the without representation, because you do have it, but it probably feels like that to you on a decision point that you don't have a lot of say within. But thank you for that comment.
And going back to the sewage thing, when we were trying to work to a solution there are 7 municipalities that are involved in that.
Right.
4 municipalities, which is the majority, all agreed in a process, but yet we were outvoted every time at the table. Yeah.
Right. Maybe to kind of spark a bit of a conversation without getting into sewage specifically, but as decision making, I mean, BC's regional district system is so unique, and so it's really, we are going to look at other communities and other hopefully within BC, but also models outside of British Columbia. And it's really hard to look at those models outside BC without folks connecting the dots by saying this worked in Edmonton because they were amalgamated, or this didn't work because they weren't amalgamated. So we're trying to talk about the philosophies and principles of other jurisdictions, Toronto, Portland, whatever have you, without getting too far into the governance, because this is a unique animal. I would suggest that there is, and we've heard this, kind of speaking bluntly, there is a bit of this us and them mentality between the municipalities and the CRD. And our comments have always been, well, you are the CRD. You have representation upwards. So you are them, I guess, in many respects, but it's just how that's structured maybe is how we're going to get into it. So it is not a second-tier level of government, as you know. It's not this body at arm's length of the local municipalities, which is part of the benefits of the regional district system in BC, but it's also obviously part of the challenges. Sometimes it might be better to have a arm's length regional government who made that decision, and then you can say, well, they made that decision. So that's, I guess, part of that conversation, to say are there ways within the current system that we can work within? Again, technically, when you sit at the regional board, you're supposed to put your regional hat on and kind of think regionally outside that as well too. So understand that it's hard sometimes that maybe some things don't get built within your specific community, but if it is the best for the region, then it's hard to you have to distance yourself that way. So it is very challenging. That's the challenge of that type of decision making when you are there to potentially represent this borderless region or borderless sub-region. What is the best way to provide that service within that borderless blob? And then where it lands is where it lands from a technical and administrative and political point of view. But it is challenging, obviously, because those hats get blurred a lot.
Well, and then within that, and having experienced it, there are very real subjects and issues at the table being discussed, and yet they do it in a format of in-camera, whereas then I don't and am not allowed to come back to council and have that other part of the discussion. And it's only with a lot of perseverance we've been able to get some things, at least given the, okay, you can go back in camera with your councils, because you're not, you're asking me to make a decision or be part of a decision that is going to be a regional outcome that directly affects my community, but nobody knows it but me. Councillor Day.
Just on when you said, I serve as the alternate at the CRD, and we certainly are, and we do talk about, putting on our regional hat when we're at that table. But what I find happens at that table is that the regional hat seems to mean Saanich and Victoria. That's where the region ends, because the people who are from Victoria or Saanich have never been here. They don't know how long it takes to drive out here. They don't know, and that's been the problem. I'm sorry, but that's why Colwood is incorporated, because when we were under the CRD board and, subdivisions were being approved, they were approved without maybe all the necessary considerations being taken into account. And that's actually the roots of some of the sewer systems that we have our 30% of our residents on, is because, we really didn't want pollution in Esquimalt Lagoon, for example. And so it was a very strong choice made by the residents of that area to protect the environment through getting sewers put in. And it was a big fight in this community. And so I think it's, a lot of the way those homes were approved and put in, there was a solution in the end, but if the people who were making the choices for this area knew this area, they might have made different choices. And we're still, to this day, I think, finding that same situation where we've been working on sewage treatment open houses, for example. They would plan a meeting for downtown at 3 o'clock. Well, if you put a meeting downtown at 3 o'clock, there's no way we're back in time for a meeting here at 6:30 or 7 o'clock. It's just, no respect for someone else's time, So, and that same has been gone on. We're at the regional table talking about spending great amount of money to treat our sewage to avoid environmental fines. But the only locations that are actually polluting the ocean at this point in time is Saanich and Oak Bay. And there are no fines being levied right now for those pollution events. So I am left feeling somewhat like we're being sold a bill of goods because the real problems are still maybe not being addressed, and the issues are seemingly resolved in favor of downtown core municipalities. And the outlying districts, well, that's just the outlying districts. And you guys fend for yourselves. And by the way, send lots of money to solve our problems over here, too.
On what else can be done is things like bylaw alignment. We've taken a West Shore approach to fireworks, and we all carry the same similar and run programs around fireworks time, Halloween there, that are in the various communities out this way for education purposes and that sort of thing. So that's, a bit of an alignment and works well out here. We've seen a significant, if almost a zero end on fireworks as we've done that. So there might be more of those kinds of opportunities there to be able to bring together.
Just for clarification, Your Worship, was that through a formal agreement, or was that just through administrative discussions to say it would be best to align that, and then you came to the same bylaw, or is there some other framework structure that?
I think it was just a collaboration of things. I'm not sure.
Fireworks?
Fireworks. You were
Yeah, so-
PES at that time, so.
Yeah, it was a collaboration amongst
Langford.
fire chiefs
Yeah.
at their level, which filtered down to councils and committees.
So I'm just running through some of the things that we're doing here.
We like to hear things that are working well. Try to keep things positive.
Yeah.
But
Are there things? So that one was that obviously that was outside any regional conversation or CRD. It was just 2 or 4 municipalities kind of getting together and say, how can we do things? Are there other?
Yeah.
Those are some of the examples certainly that we want to see that you and your neighboring communities can join together and say, okay, here's how we can harmonize things together as partners.
And that example spread regionally without the CRD actually getting involved. So I think other areas adopted similar bylaws that we initiated.
Through your worship, do you do the same for business licensing as well?
business license wise, we've taken a new stand on that one and are in the process of eliminating. It's a one-time business license application, and we're eliminating subsequent yearly updates and that sort of thing to it. That's just kind of part of the whole process in trying to level the playing field in the difference between business taxation and residential taxation. I'm just trying to look down this list to see some of the ones that we may have collaborated with a little bit more locally that would be of interest to you guys. And we, as I said, that this will be provided to you, so if there's anything that pops up and you want further explanation on it, we can always get that through to you.
Appreciate that.
We have a really good emergency services program. Again, it's kind of a what's local and then bigger, but we couldn't do it just alone. We have a really good network already in place. What else is on that list that pops up at any of you? intermunicipal business license.
I'm just looking, sorry, May.
Yep.
I'm just looking at the CRD. I mean, one of the things that just popped out of my mind that they do very well, and I don't think we give enough credit for, is the Blue Blocks recycling program. I think that's a good integrated program that we could support long term from something along that. And if I may, just talking about governance. And I don't know if this works or not works, but I think we, certainly as a Colwood resident, I would feel more comfortable if something along these lines had a schedule of for anything to pass, it would be 50% of the municipalities, which also equaled 50% of the population. And I think that that way you end up building some consensus towards Saanich and Victoria, because right now what happens is Saanich and Victoria don't need to work towards building consensus with any other municipalities because they own it. So I think if you end up building a different structure where that they're encouraged to try and bring people on board, that would probably be a beneficial thing. And again, I'm not commenting on CRD, just in general.
Where in your process, I mean, I saw, what it was worded in there, public sector organizations and community stakeholders. What about the public and taxpayers, their perceived idea of what's going on there? Because, I mean, they're the ones who've been active in trying to get some understanding or get some information around this. Where do they fit in your whole process?
Through the chair, we are going to have an open house for sure. We are talking to individual stakeholders, as Bob mentioned, business organizations. I believe we've even talked to Amalgamation, yes, some of the service providers as well too. But this is primarily a document and a process for you as local government to maybe provide some tools and some framework for you to decide how to move forward. There won't be the recommendations that aren't going to be specific to, they're just going to be providing some tools. And so this process, and unfortunately the timing, some of it goes through the summer, so probably in September, as Bob mentioned, the timeline of the interim report coming out, there'll be a public engagement piece for some feedback from that perspective. But again, from a clear perspective of what are the services being provided, we're hoping to have some, did you know that there are X amount of services? Did you know that these services are shared? And these services, and the structures of those. And then obviously, identifying some of the challenges that have been brought to our attention through this process. And then through our work in the best practices, identify some of those potential tools, some of them which could be easily changed, some of them which may take a longer discussion with respect to that under the current framework.
Education's always, never is always of good value, and involving more of the people to get to some real tangibles. But at the end of the day, any of us could release the fluffy list on here's what we are already doing kind of thing, but it's about getting the more meaningful ones, the ones that we can actually point fingers to and say, by doing this we can save, we can change, we can shorten timelines, which all equates to money and savings. Why are we double dipping? CRD has a parks, and yes, they have some beautiful parks and that sort of thing, but they also have a process there that has me a little bit stymied because, that started out as a temporary measure, at a low price for a limited amount of time. Then they extended it, and now it's doubled, and it's in perpetuity. So that just says, how do I, as a municipal leader, lean on my taxpayers to say, okay, we have that opportunity on this lovely piece of park or area that might be a great park for the future, so we're going to now tax you. Then they're paying double in order to get something in our community. And we've had it where we've gone and asked for the contribution, that we've been paying into to be considered in something here, and no, we end up going to MFA and borrowing and paying it out of our own. So, even the great things are not without their challenges. So it's about, building better plans around that as well. I have a council member here, Councillor Nault.
Yeah, on the governance issue, I think you should look very hard at the services we are sharing with other municipalities and review them very carefully. We have ones that work very well, such as fire department, mutual aid, the regional library. We have ones that kind of work, but probably could be tweaked quite a bit to make them work better, like West Shore Parks and Recreation. I think they're kind of handcuffed by their original governance model, which requires basically unanimity to do anything. And even if one small municipality decides they don't want to, they're handcuffed. Ones that, again, kind of work, but kind of don't, RCMP, for example. Colwood pays a good chunk of, we pay 90% basically of the officers assigned to Colwood, but we get basically zero say in how they're deployed and how they're used. We get to vote on the budget once a year, and that's pretty much the extent of our input. Ones that don't work at all, it's already been mentioned, CRD park requisition. We've been paying into it for a decade or more. We have yet to see a penny spent in Colwood. Back to the taxation without representation, I do agree with Councillor Martin. We do have taxation without representation because the CRD board is not elected, they're appointed. So Colwood Council might be represented on the board, but not necessarily the Colwood voters. So really, if you can elect school board members, we should be electing CRD board members. And the weighted voting, I don't think it's fair to the smaller municipalities. The way you get into a service is easy, and getting out is virtually impossible, is not fair to any of the municipalities. That's about all I have to say for now. It's like you said, there are a number of shared services. Some work well, some don't work so well, some don't work at all. I think you should look very hard at what the governance on each of those levels is and make recommendations based on that.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Is there anything from council? Because I do have an opportunity for members in the public if you guys are still thinking. Don't know.
I would guess I would just ask one question through the chair. The last question was, what best practices or innovations are you most interested in? And I guess if there were any that from your travels or your times or your research that we have a few of them, but if there's certainly some that come to mind, and if they don't come today, you can just add that to the survey as you fill those out. So that would be appreciated as well.
I think we've been, somewhat handcuffed for such a long period of time where, you may see a better way forward, but you can't extricate yourself from the service being provided already, so, contract, when we are in contract situations, it's easier. It keeps people on their toes. It's not carte blanche. You usually have another option. It's not the only sole source, way to be able to do business in there. So, it's about knowing what each other has, doing an inventory of things that, we can then go to bid with each other, For instance, City of Colwood works with Langford in IT matters and shares that cost and servicing because we're doing the same stuff. So we don't need separate individual departments, managing those kinds of things. And, Rob's brought up that could possibly be extended or expanded, in a bigger sense. We do dispatch services, with Saanich because it was, we got a better bang for our buck when you looked at the contract and identified the levels of service available to you. So, it's about working, together that way. But those are contracts. Those are not just, mandatory, everybody has to be in and paying, because now you start losing your voice in that. So, You know, it's about finding those best practices in, if the model that we have, you know, now is going to continue to exist, we need to have that, you know, reviewed, look for, you know, where we need to fix the brokenness in, and I hear it from other areas, so it's not a unique to this area. You know, I think BC regional districts have a problem, you know, transitioning between what they were originally designed for and into the new age. And, you know, we're all moving ahead or trying to move ahead, and they're still hanging on to the back of us, you know, dragging us back. So, Judith, did you have something, or Michael, even?
Thank you. Judith Collington, 3338 Acemink. Thank you. I think Council made a number of very good points, and really appreciate all that you said, and I'll try not to repeat what's already been said, because not surprisingly some of the points I was going to raise you guys have already well tackled. And I also really appreciate what you guys are trying to do, and I like the fact that the talk is about integration, not amalgamation. So what's working well, what isn't, what are the challenges? And I guess the perspective I'm bringing is as a private citizen, but also a former member of council and former alternate director at the CID. So I have a, you know, I'm not, you know, I have a little bit of a different perspective than kind of Joe citizen. So I agree. I think there are certain things that are working well. Parks, generally, people say the system is working well, and one of the things that I like about it is that there is, in kind of looking at the regional parks plan, they pull together the kind of group of citizens from around the region, and kind of ask, and it's a very, we take away the municipal borders and we kind of look at how it works region-wise. So yes, we don't have something in Colwood, but I think we do as citizens use all of the regional parks in our region. The Blue Box, the solid waste management program, I agree, works well. I think water also works well as a regional service. Something that I don't think's been raised yet tonight, the Esquimalt Lagoon Stewardship Initiative. It's something that's very much pertinent to Colwood. It's led by the CID. It wouldn't have happened without CID support. It really is a partnership between Colwood and CID and the other land managers around the table. I think it really helps to kind of bring that voice. And some of you may or may not be aware of, there's also a group that looks at integrated watershed management at the regional level, and it does just a nice job of kind of bringing together folks around the region who are interested in those kind of issues. And again, I think it's important to kind of provide that forum and information sharing piece that goes on. Good example of integrated services at a sub-regional level, West Shore Parks and Rec, the fire service agreements, and so on and so forth. Another one, by the way, Dan, I'll give you my notes, so if you don't want to write it all down. Okay, perfect. Access to politicians and staff. I know this kind of slightly relates to the amalgamation piece, but I think as a citizen, you know, it's nice to walk into a council chamber that's nice and close to home, where you're talking to council members who you can say, such and such is going on my street, and they actually know where the street is. They've been there, and they've probably got a familiarity, whereas, you know, you wouldn't necessarily do that if you were going to visit somebody who's in downtown Victoria, particularly if it's at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and you're trying to get back. So I think there is a real value in that kind of having the very local and knowledgeably local politicians. What's not working? Sewage. But I'm going to come back to that one. So there are some really interesting challenges in this. So housing and homelessness is always an interesting one, because, you know, the homeless tend to all end up downtown. That's where the services are. That's where they're with other folks who are dealing with the same situation. And so we end up with putting a lot of costs on the city of Victoria whereas really they're shared regional costs. But it's very hard to convince the Colwood taxpayer that we should be contributing to that, because, you know, we look around and we say, well, you know, there isn't a homeless problem out here. Well, there is, we just don't see it. But because it kind of moves downtown. So there is a kind of an equity issue that I think is an interesting one to wrestle with. I think things like the Blue Bridge and transportation fall into an interesting situation like that. I think I probably use the Blue Bridge quite a bit more than a lot of Victoria residents do, and yet the cost all falls on the city of Victoria. So back to the kind of more integrated transportation system, I think, is a valid point. It was touched on, but this kind of the local services. So we have West Shore RCMP, and we're scared to have a regional police service because we're worried that all of our police officers will go downtown and they won't be out here when we need them. And I'm looking at Councillor Logan. I certainly remember that conversation around ambulance as well, and how that went down. Also, interesting different community cultures around the region. I mean, we talk about these 13 different fiefdoms, and we laugh about the differences between ourselves. But I think that's also what makes this region very special. The fact that the folks who like the Machosen lifestyle can live in Machosen, and the fact that the folks who like the downtown Victoria lifestyle can live in downtown Victoria, and the fact that folks who, you know, want the peninsular agricultural lifestyle have got that. It's an incredibly special region in that way, and as they say, vive la différence. But it's also community culture within the organizations, and I remember having conversations with our former fire chief, who you may remember had, or probably still has, very passionate views on the amalgamation word. But, you know, he pointed out some of the difficulties of, you know, if you were to be so bold or brash as to try and integrate fire services across this region, it would be incredibly challenging, not only because you've got, you know, some unionized, some non-unionized, some volunteer fire departments, some paid fire departments. How do you pull all that together and not end up with something that, as individuals living in this region, we all pay a heck of a lot more for fire services? So, you know, it's not, you know, some things that sometimes sound easy to do are not. Thinking about what would, you know, it was an interesting challenge, sort of thinking about what would make a difference and what would make CRD better. And one of the things that frustrates me about the CRD is I think it should be, and it isn't, an organization that kind of helps us across this region develop a collective vision. Two bad examples of that, if you want. One was the regional growth strategy, and I'm going back to the kind of the older one, where we should have kind of had a conversation as a region that kind of really pulled us together into kind of what makes this region as a whole special. And what we ended up with was putting together all of our OCPs, all of which are valid at the OCP level, and kind of bunching it together and say, okay, here's your regional growth strategy. And therefore, it never kind of quite hung together. And I think another different example, differently framed, is the whole sewage issue. We never had a really good vision of what it was the sewage treatment project was trying to achieve. And we had a motion on the table that said, we're going to go for the lowest cost option. And that was clearly part of it. But when you participate and watch those discussions, it was very clear that there were lots of different views around the table, and was also strongly held views by many, if not most, of the folks around the table, Madam Mayor, who also talked about the importance of, you know, innovation and having something that kind of made us all feel proud of it, having things that looked at resource recovery. So yes, the cost was important, but that wasn't the only thing, and it was never articulated. And so there was always this sort of continual tension at the table in terms of, you know, everybody thinking that they wanted something slightly different, and I'm not sure that was always true. But it ended up giving very sort of confused messages to staff, who then gave confused messages back again. We also didn't specify least cost for what? You know, least cost to build the thing, least cost to operate and maintain it, least cost over a life cycle. It was never articulated. And I think that's something that a regional governance like the CRD could help us to do. We've talked, and I will echo things like lack of trust, lack of balance in representation, that weighted vote. You know, like Councillor Day, when I went to CRD school, it was about, you know, you come to this table, you take off your regional hat, you take off your Colwood hat and you put on your regional hat. And that's all very well and good. But when you know you're the only one at that table who's representing the Colwood point of view, it's pretty hard to take off that hat. And I also feel like you shouldn't, because you're also there to carry the Colwood citizen viewpoint into there. And it's, you know, the frustration of knowing that you're going to get outvoted and outweighed. It feels like your citizens are second-class citizens sometimes, and that's not right. Again, you know, this sort of sense of them and us with the CRD, and yet CRD is us. You know, our representatives are at the table, and, you know, we are the CRD, and yet culturally, again, it feels like they're not us. They don't, you know, CRD staff don't report to us. It's kind of separate and over there. And I think this sort of sense of that, you know, there are a lot of very well-paid people down there, but most of us have no idea what they do. And it's an organization that often grows, but it never seems to shrink. We're always talking about the new services that we're adding on, but we never kind of go back to the, you know, what is it that we do, and do we still need those services? So when the mayor talked about a service review, I would love to see that as one of the recommendations coming out of this, is I think it's an important piece. The mayor also talked about what I call the Hotel California syndrome. You can check in, but you can never leave, and we certainly felt the brunt of that one. And I think it does. You know, although it would make sense for Colwood to participate more actively in regional housing or the Regional Arts Committee, we don't, because we're rightly afraid of this kind of you can check in but you can never leave approach. It's a distrust of losing control of our money, our taxpayers' money, without that kind of accountability in terms of how it's spent. So I think you have a very important but very challenging job. I don't envy you. And I just wanted to finish with one thing, which is really a concern. I love that you're coming around to all of the councils, but you can see the kind of the vast public engagement that's kind of happening in behind. And I think there's a lot of very bright and engaged people out there, and I would love to see you find a way to be able to listen to those voices before you get to September, and you're kind of doing the list of. I realize time's crunchy. I realize there's the July, August, everybody's on holiday challenge. And I wasn't clear whether you talked about a survey that would be going to councils. Is that also something members of the public can input on? Okay. So I would encourage you to think about if there are ways to hear those smart voices that are out there, in addition to the smart voices that are here. Thank you.
And just to add to that part is we have a very talented communications officer that can take that and get that out. And you know, if you were able to come up with something that you wanted to do a bit stronger of a public outreach on, that would be happy to help you out with it. Yeah, we have a community social coming up down on the waterfront, and last year there was an expectation of about 200 people to come, and we ended up with over 1,000. So we're moving it on up to, I think it's 2,000 kind of expectation, and we'll see what we get. So. Anything final word to council or questions? Anything further? Councillor Day?
Just on the public engagement part, I really do think that is important, and certainly amalgamation wasn't really a big factor during our election. We did have a pro-amalgamation candidate. She did not get elected, but it wasn't something that was coming out loud and clear from our community. But when I have spoken to our community, I've definitely heard a desire to know and understand more. And I think our experience has been that our public events like Eats and Beats at the Lagoon and other park events that we've held have been good opportunities to do a little bit of outreach with our community. So it might be a small thing in a way, but it might be a good way to test out some material in terms of getting either some feedback from people or giving some information.
Was there anything else on that memo, Ian, that you have here, or should we just have that provided to?
No, Your Worship, I can just, I've got a spare here. I can hand it to them after the meeting.
Okay. Yeah, just want to make sure that they have that. Anything else from you folks? Bob? You good? Alrighty. And open. Don't, this isn't just the only one. So if there's anything that comes up, by all means, happy to have a chat. Alrighty. With that, folks, end of public participation. Looking for adjournment? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.